So let's talk about how the hypothalamus and the pituitary glands work. So this is the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is actually brain tissue, and its extension is called the posterior pituitary. Posterior pituitary. But then we also have another extension called the anterior pituitary. The thing with the anterior pituitary is that during the development period, we actually have the roof of your mouth, the palate, extend upwards towards the hypothalamus area, and that tissue gets attached to the hypothalamus, and when the baby is born, by the time the baby is born, the hard palate closes off. So, because of that, the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary share common tissue, but the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary do not share common tissue. This is why I drew it in a different color, because I want you to understand that the hypothalamus extends over to the posterior pituitary, but it does not to the anterior pituitary. So there are two hormones that we need to memorize that are being secreted by the hypothalamus into the posterior pituitary. And all of these hormones, basically, will go into the bloodstream. Okay. So these hormones will be secreted over. So there are two hormones that we have to memorize. And these two hormones are oxytocin. And oxytocin is going to target either the mammary gland, or the uterus. So in the mammary gland, what it's going to do is it is going to tell it to squeeze milk out. So it doesn't make it, but it squeezes the milk out. In the uterus, it's going to tell it to squeeze baby out. So during labor, oxytocin starts to surge, and we will have positive feedback into the brain telling it you need to secrete more oxytocin so that we can squeeze the baby out. Okay? The second type of hormone secreted by the posterior pituitary is called ADH. ADH stands for anti-diuretic hormone. Just like the word suggests, it's anti, not diuretic, against water. So it will be targeting, it targets the nephron of the kidney. And what this does, it is going to reabsorb water before urine is completely excreted out, committed to be excreted out of the body. Good. So these two hormones must be memorized for the posterior pituitary. Now let's continue and let's talk about the anterior pituitary hormones. Anterior pituitary hormones, there is going to be a pretty long list of hormones that we need to memorize. But prior to doing that, let me just explain to you what happens with the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is going to be secreting hormones. All of these hormones are going to go to stimulate the anterior pituitary cells. And the anterior pituitary cells, in turn, will start secreting hormones that will go into the bloodstream. Okay? So the hormones that we need to start memorizing for the anterior pituitary, I like to memorize them as flat peg. Okay? Flat peg. This is on the mnemonic. And F stands for FSH, L stands for LH, ACTH, TSH, prolactin, endorphins, and growth hormone.